So good evening, everyone. Venerable Chodron won't be here tonight, but she'll be back next week. And she asked us to have a bit of an overview of the Gomchen Lamrim. So we're going to do an overview of part of it because she taught so much already that I couldn't really fit it in one evening. So we'll start there. So let's start by setting our... Oh, and also before we get any farther, next week, we'll be at the same time for people who are in the Pacific time zone because we have our daylight saving thing changes, right? So it will be at 6 p.m. Pacific time, and so that will be the same for folks. If you're in Singapore, it will be an hour later than usual for the next, 6 months or whatever it is, because of the time change that we go through in the U.S. here. Okay. So let's start with our motivation, and we'll take one of the teachings that we'll touch on tonight and use it as our motivation. It's one that Deshan Rinpoche used to use a lot, and it makes so much sense. It's so amazing that the Lamrim teachings teach us actually how to listen to teachings. So as we set our motivation tonight, let's not be like any of the 3 pots. So we work at the very beginning of a teaching while we're sitting here to clear our minds and get them, ready. So not like an overturned pot, a pot that's upside down like this. Nothing can really get in. They talk about when you're all distracted, that things, if you're too tired and you're just falling asleep, nothing really goes in. So if you're feeling that way, maybe get a cup of tea. Go get a cup of coffee if you're not here. And then there's the pot that's kind of pierced with holes in the bottom, and everything just kind of drains out. And that's like when we receive these precious teachings and we listen, we're awake, we're even very alert when they happen. But we don't go back and review and look at our notes, and it just kind of in one ear, out the other. So we heard it, but we don't retain it. So let's make a aspiration to avoid doing that and to take some time to look at our notes and review and contemplate the teachings that we hear. And then the other one is like a soiled pot, or you've got like dirt or poison in it or something, and that's when you're sitting here during a teaching and you either have a poor motivation for listening or you have wrong views come up in your mind, like afflictions come up, and you're just soiling the teachings. So let's start by setting our motivation to avoid those things, see them when they come up in our mind and work with them very firmly so that we can make progress day by day, working with these beautiful teachings that can work with every state of mind to help us to benefit ourselves and others. So let's do this with this long-term wish to become fully awakened. Okay. So we're going to start at the beginning. If you have any notes on this, you might want to just turn to your page 1, and you can maybe fill in some blanks. And might, for people who have the outline or the root text, might be useful to have it out. So this Gomchen Lamrim, that translates as the great meditation on the Lamrim, and the Lamrim is the stages of the path. And this was written by Gomchen Nawang Drapa, and he was a student of a teacher named J. Logo Tampa, who lived in 1404 to 1478. That person was the 6th successor to Lama Tsongkhapa. So this text is actually like an excerpt, like a cliff notes on Lama Tsongkhapa's middle-length Lamrim. And the middle-length Lamrim is one that's really made for meditators. The great treatise is made more for the scholars, but the middle-length one was really written for meditators. And so this is like the cliff notes on that. So he starts off saying, homage to the perfect gurus through his superior practice of the three instructions and of the transmitted and realized teaching, which is the scriptural and realized Dharma. He who is able to uphold the Buddha's thinking exactly, abiding by this great master, I shall practice the stages of the path of Sutta and Tantra. So he starts this with the homage, and then he goes into explaining that there's 4 main sections of this text, and this is very traditional. The greatness of the teacher, of the teachings, how to listen and explain the teachings, which actually, the part about explaining the teachings, I think, is a little more developed than we often see. We'll be going through that tonight. And then how the disciples or students are progressively guided by the actual teaching. And so the greatness of the author, he doesn't go into in this text, but the author actually is referring to Atisha, because that's who Lama Tsongkhapa says is the actual author, of the Lamrim, because Atisha first wrote the book Lamp to the Path of Enlightenment, laying out this kind of structure based on previous teachings. So the real first section that the text gets into is the greatness of the teaching. And this is I think I love this part about the Lamrim. I think it's so important to understand. So it's good that we have this group of people here tonight, I think, because this is something really fantastic to understand about this particular set of teachings, no matter what tradition you're in, I think, as a Buddhist. Because this style of teaching, the greatness of it is it allows you to realize that all of the teachings are free from contradictions. And like if you just were to pick up the middle-length discourses in the Pali Canon and figure out, well, how am I supposed to be a Buddhist? It's not so easy, because the Buddha just taught whoever he met. So then from there on after, there was always this, well, what order do we do things in? And a lot has been done to elucidate that. This particular teaching meets that need completely, because by understanding the Lamrim, you'll understand that within the 3 vehicles, and here it's referring to the fundamental vehicle, which is like what we might call the Theravada tradition now, or the Pali Canon, the universal vehicle, or the Mahayana, and Tantra, you can know what is to be discarded and realized in either the main path or one of its branches. So you'll know what is the method for any individual to achieve Buddhahood, and you'll realize that these teachings are all free of contradictions. So this is the thing that's for many people quite confusing when they first, like, where do you start in the Buddhist path, and how do these, what it's saying here is these teachings are all for one practitioner at different stages. And I'll get into that more. So in this particular outline, there's like the first, when you say what is to be discarded and what is to be realized, and this is what's confusing, is because, for example, like sometimes they'll talk about, like, okay, these teachings have 3 scopes or 3 levels of motivation. The first is to attain a precious human rebirth. The second is to reach nirvana, be liberated from cyclic existence. And the third is to become a Buddha. So in this first scope, when they talk about the body, they're very much saying, oh, this body is the basis of a precious human life. And then in the next scope, they're saying, oh, this body is like an encapsulation or the result of all the afflictions and karma which keeps us bound in cyclic existence, and it's foul by nature. So if you don't know what's happening, you'll go like, what's going on here? One minute they're talking this way, one minute they're talking that way, and you can't see how they all fit together. But these are not contradictory teachings. It depends on the context. So once you understand the Lamrim, you'll understand how this works. Or another example would be the small details of the Vinaya precepts versus the Bodhisattva precepts. And it's said that with the lesser Vinaya precepts, put the Bodhisattva precepts first. And that could be kind of confusing. How can you be, here you can do it, here you can't? It's like, doesn't that contradict? Well, it doesn't really, because there's actually, you have quite a foundation when you have the Vinaya precepts, and you have to have that developed before you take the Bodhisattva precepts. So it's not like you're just walking off the street and taking the Bodhisattva precepts and you're throwing away your 5 lay precepts or your monastic precepts. It's not like that at all. You have a foundation before you take the Bodhisattva precepts, and then you have a foundation that you develop with the Bodhisattva precepts. So then, when you let go of a lesser Vinaya type precept because it kind of gets trumped by the Bodhisattva precept, you're actually at a level where you're really working for the benefit of others. When you're doing the first precepts, the pratimoksha precepts or the individual liberation precepts, you're really not, that's not a Mahayana motivation necessarily, and so you're really trying to get your act together, not be harming others. You're not so much thinking about benefiting others, but you're very clear when you're acting with a bodhisattva in the bodhisattva domain of this is to benefit others, it's not about me. So then a lesser Vinaya precept can be left aside because it's going to be the greater good. So these things aren't contradictory. So those are 2 examples of that. Those things come up all the time with people. There's so many situations where this kind of conflict can be seen if you don't understand these 3 levels of motivation for one practitioner at different times. Does that make sense? Okay. So then the other greatness of the Lamrim teachings, it allows you to recognize all the scriptures as instructions for practice. And some people think that, you study one thing and you meditate on something else. But that is not how we're instructed at all here. It's more like you have to ascertain the meaning of the scriptures and the discourses, and then you become skilled in what practices, which ones you need to use analytical meditation, which one you use stabilizing meditation for. And you don't really reject the teachings at all. You see all of the teachings as at some point going to be something that you put into practice. Maybe you're not doing it right now. Maybe it's at you're at the learning level, intellectual level, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be trying to then, it's hearing, thinking about, and contemplating, and then meditating. Eventually, once you have heard the teachings, you understand the meaning, then the point is to meditate on them. So that means that every spiritual instruction dawns on the mind as a personal instruction. So they aren't just intellectual endeavors, they're all made for practice. So that's the second greatness. And the third is that it allows you to easily discern what was the Buddha's intent, what were his intentions. And so when you, like in the monasteries in Tibet, where they study for 15 or 20 years or more, they read these great treatises, but a lot of times it's difficult to sift through that to figure out what were the main themes, what were the main principles. And the Lamrim actually is extracted from the great treatises and then systematized for practice. And so it's in a sense a cliff notes of the treatise in a way. It contains it all, but in a method for practice and in an order. So it would take a lot of time to go through all those, and that's what they do in these curriculums. But then when they finish that and they've gone through this in 3-part harmony, then they can turn to the Lamrim, and when they read, one paragraph, one page, it will bring forth tons that they've spent years learning about. So it's, that's the way this is meant to be used. So that's a greatness, because you understand easily what are the Buddha's main, or the conqueror's main intentions. And the fourth is that it allows you to automatically avoid grave misdeeds. So this is an important point, not to kind of, I don't want to say revoke, it's not the right word, not to turn your back on any part of the Dharma. Some people may kind of start going down a wrong path and see some of the things that the Buddha taught as being obstacles to attaining Buddhahood and other things as being methods. But what the Buddha taught are all methods for becoming a Buddha. They're just practiced at different times for people with different dispositions. So it's a misdeed to reject. And so in our text here, that wasn't brought out very well, but in the Great Treatise, they bring it out a little bit better. And so I'll read this section from, this is in the Great Treatise on the Great Treatise on the Lamrim. And this is from the Lotus Sutra. And it explains that all of the Buddha's words directly or indirectly teach methods for becoming a Buddha. And it says, there are those who, with misunderstanding, who hold that some teachings are methods for becoming a Buddha and some teachings are obstacles to becoming a Buddha. They then differentiate the words of the Buddha into good and bad, reasonable and unreasonable, great and small vehicles. Finally, they hold that some teachings are to be cast aside, saying a bodhisattva should train in this and should not train in that. Thus, they abandon the teachings. This is what was happening a couple of years ago at Airway Heights when they were dissing people in the fundamental vehicle there. They didn't understand this, and so we're working that out now. And that's changed a lot. But see, as we've always been told in our tradition, we actually practice all the vehicles. We don't reject any of them, and we need to practice all of them. And one simple reason is that if you're going to become a Buddha, you're going to meet people in all of these with all these different dispositions, and you need to know all of this. So then it goes on to say in this sutra, gathering all the threads, it says, Manjushri, whoever distinguishes some of the words spoken by the Tathagata as good and some as bad abandons the teachings. If you say, this is reasonable, this is unreasonable, you abandon the teaching. If you say, this was set forth for the sake of bodhisattvas, this was set forth for the sake of shravakas, which are people trying to become arhats, reach nirvana, you abandon the teaching. If you say, this was set forth for the sake of the solitary realizers, you abandon the teaching. If you say, this is not a training of bodhisattvas, you abandon the teaching. So basically, we practice all the vehicles. So in the other way this can happen is maybe we don't know as much as some of these scholars, but we might just think, say, some of these Buddhist traditions just don't, aren't good, they're bad. You don't understand them, you can get judgmental. But being different isn't bad. They're different ways. And another thing to consider is in the issue of debate. When people are debating, which is huge in Tibetan Buddhism, they're not rejecting the teaching. They're not denying that the Buddha taught something. They're actually trying to get at the truth. So these are the distinctions that we might have to think about, in this regard. So those are the four greatnesses of the Lamrim.
Repeat the first one.
Sure. The first one was the greatness of its allowing you to realize that all the teachings are free of contradictions, and that's right straight from the outline. I'm using the outline as the root and then filling it in with Venerable Chodron's teachings, and once in a while, when things weren't really clear to me, I went to the Great Treatise, and that's pretty much what we're doing here tonight. So then the next section goes into how to listen and explain the teachings, and then it goes first into the benefits of hearing the teachings. And these teachings are great to read. I mean, if you read the Great Treatise, I find these really, they make my mind very happy, because there's a kind of wisdom that develops from hearing and listening to teachings. So it says in our outline, whoever hears this teaching will have their minds filled with faith, they will delight in spiritual practice, they will be stable in it, and their wisdom will grow and their ignorance will be dispelled. It would be worth buying even with your own flesh. And that's from the Jataka tales. So in our understanding of faith, it's a faith of understanding. It's not like a blind faith. And this kind of understanding is what gives us stability and also delight in our practice. And so this kind of understanding helps us to get rid of, like, when you first kind of get going, sometimes in the Dharma, you're kind of on and off, practice, don't practice. You can do that for years, get interested and then drop it for a few years and come back and da-da-da. But when you really take these teachings to heart and understand them, then you'll really keep going. And in doing this kind of faith is one, I said, not a blind faith. It's one where we use our intelligence, we try out the teachings, and we see if they work. And that's what makes you use them. You know, if it just stays intellectual and you're not really working on changing things in your life, it will just be like a hobby. You know, like, hey, let's read a book. So in order to do this kind of growth, we also need self-discipline or community support. We need to make our practice stable, so it's a day-to-day part of our life. And think of it as nourishing yourself. Every day you need to nourish yourself in this way. So then Venerable talked about something that, you know, for those of us who do practice every day, many sessions are just kind of, and if you have a lot of commitments, blah, 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 same commitments every day. And then she says about that, you know, because your attitude can get kind of like, here we go again. She says, this actually sustains us. She said, the mind that thinks it's blah, blah is seeking peak experiences. It's a drug addict's mind wanting a high every morning. Bingo. That's true. So you got to find that in your own mind when you start thinking, you know, I'm not getting anywhere here, you know, da, 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 da. So she says, when something clicks, it's because you've gone through these practices many, many times in routine sessions that were kind of maybe even feeling ho-hum, right? But these are like the drops in a bucket. They eventually fill the bucket. So you want to be content and stable with creating the causes. That's Venerable Children, one of her mottos, create the causes. We have to be content just to create the causes. That's really not what a Westerner wants to hear. And we don't think that way at all. We're like, give me an antibiotic. I want to be feeling good in 2 days. But as you do this, and as you learn to be content with creating the causes, your mind will improve. You'll be more stable. Your life will improve. And by listening, your wisdom will grow. And then when he says this part about this is worth, in the Jataka Tales, this is worth buying even with your own flesh. This is because it would be easy to do if you knew that your flesh was just as important as like dirt, right? I mean, it's when you're at a certain level of practice, you actually, like a bodhisattva at a certain level, they can actually let go of their body. And so even at our level, we can see what the body is made out of and what we run after in this life, and we can see that maybe I'm not ready to give up my flesh, but I can understand intellectually that the Dharma is a much more reliable refuge than the things I usually run after. That might be more our level. I can give up coffee and live at the Abbey. I think I can manage that. So we want to, you know, Venerable always wants to remind us that our body is recycled tofu skins. One day we're going to separate from it. It will be of zero benefit. It could be an object of pain. And it could be an object of attachment if we're not careful. So we need to try to learn and really understand that what will be a benefit at the time of death, it won't be our body. It will be our Dharma practice. It will be all our accumulated wisdom and wholesome karma. That's what we need to have then. And then the next section goes into generating respect for the teaching and for the teachers. And so while listening with the teaching, we want to, says, listen with one-pointed faith and veneration. And basically we want to be aware of what a precious opportunity it is to hear these teachings. Free ourselves from any kind of pride or scorn for the teachings or the teachers. So you don't want to especially deprecate or put down any of these. Like tonight we're going over these initial teachings. You know, and sometimes you can say, oh, these are preliminary, no big deal, I think I can tune out. But actually, as they, I think it was Gomchen who said that these teachings are the profound teachings. The other ones, the higher teachings, are based upon them. And what I take that to mean is like to realize, like, say, the Four Seals. or to realize impermanence, or any of those things. This is all the foundation, and these are very profound realizations. And you need those as a basis for everything that's built on them. So these are the profound teachings. That's how I say it to myself. While listening to the teaching, let's see. That sentence doesn't work so well. It kind of is going into the part of performing services and such, being respectful. This is how you're supposed to be thinking about the teacher at this point. Helping the teacher so the teachings can happen, being respectful for the teacher and the teachings, and consider the teacher as you do the Buddha. So Venerable says, think like this: if the Buddha were here, he wouldn't say anything different from what my teacher is saying. This is how we want to regard our spiritual mentor. And so sometimes maybe you might get unhappy because you want to have a private appointment, or you're wanting something, in person from the teacher. And then you can even be sitting in a teaching and emotionally you can't even hear the teachings because you're wanting certain emotional needs met. That's really not why we're here. That's, we have to work that out in ourselves, but this isn't that's when you see the list of the qualities of a spiritual mentor, it doesn't say meet the student's emotional needs. You're not going to see that there. Okay. And now the next section is actually, how do you listen? And the first part is rely on the 6 recognitions. And this one I want people to write. Make sure you write this down if you don't have it, or get it from me later. When I first moved here, Venerable had me think about this every morning. This is what I thought about when I woke up. So I'll just say it first the way I say it. I see myself as a sick person. The Buddha is the doctor. The Dharma is the medicine. Practice is the way to be cured. The Buddha is reliable and the Dharma is non-deceptive. May the Buddha Dharma flourish for a very long time. Those are the way I put it. So this first thing, very important, and we're not spending a lot of time on most of this tonight. We're just going to spend time on number 4. But the first one, we have to see ourselves as a sick person, that we need help. And not this big, I need help. Not that. That's the big me showing up. But we have to see that, we're the patient here. And that the Buddha has, is the skilled physician. The Dharma is the medicine. And then here says, our text here says, steady application as the cure. And so I'm kind of revising what I say to myself. I always have said practicing is the way to be cured. But I want to kind of put now, steady, earnest practicing is the way to be cured. You don't really need that if you're just doing that in the moment, but that's what it's referring to. And so here's a little bit more on that. Think of earnest practice as the way to cure your disease. So sick people know that they can't be cured without taking the medicine, so they take it. And when we engage in practice earnestly, we see that we can't get rid of our afflictions unless we practice these teachings that have been given to us by our teachers. So we don't want to just devote ourselves to reading tons of books and, just piling up a lot of intellectual words and information and vocabulary. We actually want to engage in the practice. So moreover, 1 or 2 doses of medicine will not do anything at all for lepers who have lost their hands and feet. This is the great treatise. Similarly, to put the meaning of the instructions into practice just once or twice is insufficient for us who from beginningless time have been stricken with the virulent illness of the afflictions. So that's the perspective we have to have when we say steady, earnest practice is the way to be cured. We have to have a realistic view. This is, I think, what gets a lot of people in trouble because they want things to happen quicker. But you have to realize from beginningless time, we've had this ignorance. And so we have a long-term chronic disease here that we've had for a lifetime. So you have to have more of that kind of perspective to be realistic. So in that, because we have that understanding, then we want to use our discerning wisdom and we want to look at the entirety of every aspect of the path and make effort that's like a river's current. So then Chanda Goman said, our minds are constantly confused. We have been ill for a very long time. What is achieved by lepers who have lost their arms and legs and only occasionally take medicine? That's where these words come from. He's commenting on this verse. So as we've said, then we need to think of ourselves as a sick person. This is really important, not in a way that brings us down, but in a way that makes us want to practice and see that we need to. Okay, and then I think we've covered that pretty well. So that was the fourth. The fifth is the Tathagas are superior beings. So I always say it as the Buddha is reliable and the Dharma is non-defective. I think that's the way I was taught it. And then the last part is that the teaching will remain forever. And this is, I always say, may the Buddha Dharma flourish for a very long time. So this is like an aspiration that we're setting. And even though we aren't like lineage holders who have that really huge responsibility of holding these teachings, we do have responsibility according to His Holiness. Our responsibility is to transform ourselves, and that is how everything we do in that way, and anything we can share from what we've worked and learned in the Dharma is the way we do this. And then the next part about how to listen, they talk about these three pots, which we already pretty much went through briefly. And then in our text here it says that we want to listen well and thoroughly retain what you hear. In brief, bring together the causes to achieve Buddhahood and recall the benefits of learning and listen with enthusiasm. So I think this is based on in the text, you hear this, listen well, thoroughly, and hold it in mind. That's kind of the slogan that goes with the three pots. Listen well, that's the first one where you don't have it upside down, you're not asleep. Thoroughly, meaning that you, well, maybe, I'm not sure. Now that I think about it, thoroughly, and retain what you hear. So retain what you hear is the one for the holds. Thoroughly. Mm-hmm. I could take that either way. Listen well to me refers more to the one with the poisons, I think. And thoroughly is that you're taking it all in and not distracted. I would guess it goes that way, although it didn't really say. The part about listening with enthusiasm, Venerable mentioned it, it's so true that whenever someone gives a teaching, it's an interactive process. And so what you're doing is part of what's going to make tonight happen. So when you do the BBCs sometimes at lunch and you look at everybody and they're whatever they're doing, it's so interesting. Once I sat here, it really changed what I do when I sit there after sitting here once or twice and watching what everybody's doing. I'm like, oh my God. I mean, not everyone, but it's really amazing what it does to the person teaching. So I have a lot more mindfulness now than I used to. So just to let you know, for others' benefit, maybe my own. Okay, then it goes into the section on how to explain the teaching. And the first part of this is contemplating the benefits of explaining the teaching. And this text really draws out more like what's happening on the side of the teacher here. This first part was, when you're listening. Now this is like for the teacher to kind of get them revved up to teach and, because you know how it is in our Lamrim, it's always they show you the advantages of something and the disadvantages. So here it really is going into the advantages, the benefits of explaining the teaching. So this has, Venerable has said, the teacher also has to generate their motivation to teach, so they have to look at the benefits of how important it is to do it so that you can enjoy it and do it properly. And so our text says we want to reject any consideration for gains and honors. So you don't want to think anything about material offerings or boosting your ego or anything. Instead, you go into this thinking, like the verse that we often say before we start, a star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble. And it goes on, see conditioned things as such. So basically, whenever His Holiness gets up to teach, he snaps his fingers and he thinks of this verse, and one of the things he does is like, this is just impermanent. I'm going to teach, and it's just like that. In a moment, I'm going to be off this throne he's usually on, and it's just briefly, nothing to get attached to. And then Venerable Chodron mentioned that before the teaching, imagine that on the seat that you're going to sit on, imagine the lineage there and bow to them, snap your fingers as a sign of impermanence, and get rid of the mind that wants any benefit for this life. So this is, this is teaching us how to become teachers. And then our text goes on and says, reject disturbing thinking and incorrect explanations. So you want to really know the material so that you can try to give a correct explanation. Teach as the Buddha has taught, the sutras and so on. And so the Buddha was teaching from his internal experience, and that's what we try to do, is we try to teach from our own understanding. And then also the Buddha taught with a lot of affection and care for everyone he met. Even in one of the Pali, might be in the ones that are the numbered discourses or the connected discourses, he actually taught a man how to lose weight in there. It was really good. He just was meeting the needs of the people in front of him. Okay. So there were some things in the Great Treatise that I thought were helpful on this regard, because some of this I wasn't so clear on. This next part, it says, you will gain countless benefits as taught in these two sutras and whatever. And so I wanted to look at some of those just briefly. And this is from the Great Treatise. And there's these 20 benefits of generosity when you give the gift of the teaching without any concern for material things, profit, or honor. And what are these 20? So these are the 20 benefits of teaching in a proper manner. You will come to have recollection. These are in the Great Treatise, so you can find them there, or you can write them down. Recollection, intelligence, understanding, stability, and that means it had two meanings. Either you'll come to have belief or you'll come to have diligence. And the fifth one was wisdom, supermundane wisdom, little desire, little hatred, little ignorance. The demons will not find an opportunity to harm you, which we would probably translate as, I think demons a lot of times stand for disturbing, really severely disturbing mental states. Sometimes in Tibet they call those demons. The Bhagavan Buddhas will think of you as a precious only child. Non-humans will guard you. Deities will bestow charisma and power on you. And the enemies will find no opportunity to harm you. Friends will remain steadfast. Your words will be trusted. You will attain fearlessness. You will have abundant happiness. You will be praised by the wise, and your gift of the teaching will be worthy of remembrance. So that's some of the benefits. So, sounds pretty good. Let's do it. Okay, and then there's this section, the next section had to do with generating respect for the teacher and the teaching. And again, I took this from the Great Treatise. It's the same, but it was easier for me to understand. When the Buddha first taught, he actually also did this, generated respect for the teacher and the teaching. When he set forth the Prajnaparamita Sutras, he performed such acts of respect as arranging the throne himself. So that was his sign of respect there. And likewise, since these teachings are respected even by the Buddhas, when you explain the teachings, be very respectful to the teachings and to the teacher, who is Shakyamuni Buddha, by remembering their good qualities and their kindness. So that's the state of mind that we want to hold. And that's how the Buddha did it. So the actual state of mind, with what state of mind and what behavior to teach, the actual state of mind. And this is completely practical. Give up, it says give up, this is our text here now, give up retaining information, because it's not like we're just trying to retain information, we need to practice the Dharma. Give up bragging, give up weariness with teaching, give up criticizing others, give up procrastination, give up jealousy. Cultivate love for your disciples and maintain these 5 recognitions. And that are these same kind of things that we talked about, these 6 recognitions, only here it's set forth a little differently. So you think of yourself as the doctor. You think of the teaching as the medicine. Those listening to the teachings as, people with illness. That the Tathagatas are excellent beings, and you wish that the teachings remain for a long time. So this is it's just helping us to understand the attitude that we want to have as a teacher. And Venerables makes sure that we tries to impress on us to understand not to teach things that you've made up. Secondly, your mind you can kind of slide there sometimes. Don't give wrong explanations, because this is a tremendous responsibility. She often says that sometimes the first time somebody hears something, that's kind of what they remember, and if it's wrong, it's really hard to dispel that. So, and then you want to prepare yourself. I think we'll skip that part. Venerable explained what she did when she teaches, and this I think I'd like to repeat because this is her own personal preparation. She visualizes Manjushri. She makes aspirations. May everything I say be correct. May I not say anything that is mistaken. So avoiding distorting the Dharma. May I say what this audience needs to hear. So cluing into the people that are in front of you. Like she's told us before when we do BBCs, don't talk to the camera. Talk to the people in the room. May I express it articulately, and may they understand it correctly. May we all have the correct motivation for sharing the Dharma. And then she imagines that Manjushri dissolves into her. She does some self-generation, and then she does some mantras. And she mentioned that His Holiness says, I'm just an older brother sharing what I know. So that's his attitude when he teaches. A lot of pages here. Not much time. Let's see, we start at 6:15. Oh yeah, we got a lot of time. We'll go to 7:30 probably, because I looked at the time. Most of the talks were about 75, so we'll just keep going and see where we get. The next section is differentiating between whom to teach and whom not to teach. So this is good for us to learn, and as we always have guests here, it's worth repeating a lot. It's as the teacher's responsibility is, you're supposed to teach to those whose behavior accords, they're behaving properly, they're in accordance with the Vinaya, and that the teachings have been requested. And often we request teachings 3 times, sincerely. So Venerable mentioned that you don't really want to teach to, you want to teach to people who can listen properly and are respectful. Not wearing hats, not laying down, not talking to each other, not flirting and tickling each other. These are her words. Not eating, yawning loudly. I have a feeling these are things she's seen. Bouncing their legs, tapping their fingers, playing with their malas, looking around. So that was her lesson to us. So, but I think the bigger point here, because those are all things that we need to be aware of, but the big point here is, I think one time I wanted to share something with a friend of mine, and Darshan Rinpoche, she wasn't Buddhist, and he said, it won't help her. You have to, the people have to be kind of ready for things, and you just have to have that kind of understanding that when they're ready to listen, where they are at, they have to be worthy recipients. But if they are worthy recipients, you can teach as an exception even when it's not been requested. And that, she said, this may be informally when unsolicited. So I took that to mean that for a formal teaching it should be requested, but sometimes we're in other more casual situations and people are definitely interested, so find a way to share, and it doesn't mean you have to use Dharma words. People want to learn something, so teach. You just use your common language a lot of times. Okay. The way to conclude, common to both the teacher and the disciple. Next, dedicate to complete awakening the virtue of teaching and listening. In this way, every single time you listen or teach, accordingly you will gain innumerable benefits. So this is the instruction, hold it dear. So basically we want to make sure we're dedicating, we're holding things in the way they've taught us and conclude it with dedicating to full awakening. And then the next section goes into how the disciples are guided by the actual teaching. And so this is where you first really start this has all been kind of preliminary information in the Lamrim. Now it's like, now here's what we're going to teach. And the first topic that they have is how to rely on the spiritual mentor, the root of the path. And they call it the spiritual mentor, the root of the path, because the teacher is, our fundamental teacher is the Buddha. And the Buddha isn't here now, but our teachers are. And this root of the path means that their role is to actually kind of nourish us and stabilize us as students. And so Venerable explained that the word lama or spiritual mentor in Tibetan is timpa, and timpa means to rely or to depend upon. So there's somebody who can guide you that you can really benefit from. And so now it goes into what are the characteristics of the spiritual mentor to be relied upon. And this is actually up to the student. It's not really proper the way we're instructed in our tradition for a teacher to request you to become a student. It's always the other way around. You have to kind of worry if someone's requesting you to become a student, actually. It's not, in a Tibetan tradition, it's not done that way in any of them that I'm aware of. So the onus, the burden is on the student to inform themselves and learn what are the qualities of a teacher, what are the characteristics. And so we have teachings on this, a lot of them here in the Lamrim. So, and we first want to have the recognition that the excellent teacher is the source of all temporary happiness and certain goodness, beginning with the production of a single good quality and the reduction of a single fault, and eventually encompassing all the knowledge beyond that. So this is the way you initially rely on a teacher is important. So then they talk about kind of what the benefits are. In short, attaining and bringing to completion all the bodhisattva deeds, these are the benefits. Likewise, will attain and bring to completion the perfections, the levels, the forbearances, the concentrations, the super knowledges. We'll retain the teachings we've heard. We'll learn to do dedications, aspirational prayers. We'll have confidence to speak. And all the qualities of a Buddha are contingent upon the Guru. So this is like the root. The Guru is their cause. This is how it's stated in our tradition. And so I like this quote here. I'm just adding this little bit from the great treatise from one of the previous masters who says, "For attaining freedom, there is nothing more important than the Guru. It's sufficient to learn the activities of this life by watching others, but you will not learn them well without an instructor. Likewise, without a guru or a teacher, how can we succeed in traveling to a place where we have never been, having just been reborn from a miserable realm?" That's what Geshe Sopa says. You've just gotten out of a miserable realm. You're like a freshman in college is how he explains it. So you need some guidance. That's our situation. I mean, anyone here who's practiced a while is like, yeah, we get it. But you don't know that at first, so we say this, and now you got to find out what that means for yourself. So what we do is, as Venerable says, it's not love at first sight. That's not the way you choose a teacher. You learn the qualities and the characteristics. And so we usually explain these 10 qualities that come from Maitreya. And in our text here, they're listed having tamed the mount of their mind by training in ethical discipline. So that, meaning they have the teacher reflects, models ethical conduct. They have the ropes of mindfulness and introspective awareness and concentration, having made their minds serviceable. So that means they have the higher training of concentration. So they have the ethics, the concentration. The third one is they perceive profound thusness with the eye of wisdom. So this eye of wisdom is the best level of wisdom that someone might have. It's like direct perception. The next best is that they have an inference, more like a conceptual understanding of thusness or the reality, the nature of reality. And then at least they have a correct understanding of the teachings. So that means that they have some, level of the higher training of wisdom. The fourth quality is that they've studied much. So that means that you want a teacher who knows a variety of teachings, not just one practice. Our minds are very complicated. It's not like, I always like this, if you only have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. But our minds aren't like that at all. You can't use one antidote. Even for anger, there's so many different ways to work with anger, and we need them all because we can't get them all to work. So this is how our minds are. We have so many different aspects of our mind, so we need different practices. And the fifth one is their good qualities surpass their disciples. And so you don't look for someone with charisma. And then the sixth, understanding thusness by just scriptural citations and logical arguments is also acceptable. So that means that, maybe they haven't realized emptiness, but they have a correct understanding. And then the seventh is they're proficient speakers with skill to guide others progressively. So this is someone who can explain the teachings and the path well. They can introduce a topic, they can explain it in detail, or they could summarize it briefly. They can teach it in one paragraph or in a whole series. That's what most of the great teachers can do. They can take one thing and spend all day on it, or they can do it in 3 sentences, or they can do it in 5 paragraphs. It's really possible. So that's a proficient skill in that way, to guide others progressively. The eighth is that they have a loving nature. They're moved by compassion when they teach. So it has to be someone who really cares about their disciples. It won't last if there's just somebody that's seeking fame or following. That's not the motivation. And the ninth is have constant joy and enthusiasm. So someone who enjoys guiding students and teaching. And then not overcome by lassitude for teaching. So they stay loving. They don't get fed up with us who are slow learners or not learning. We're doing everything we're doing. Venerable Chodron mentioned that her teachers have taught these subjects for all of her life, these same topics, and they never get fed up. And because sometimes we aren't always the greatest students, they really need a lot of patience. So we need to find someone with those 10 qualities. But they say if you can't find someone with 10, find someone with 5. If you can't find 5, 3. And then that comes down to make sure they know more than you do. It says here, although the 3 trainings, understanding thusness and compassion, are essential, given our degenerate times, if they are difficult to find, see it as a key to have more good qualities than bad ones. So.
I think there was another addition to that, and who are more concerned with future and present lives,
Mm-hmm.
it's essential, and then more concerned with the welfare of others.
Yeah, I didn't put everything in because I'm trying to abbreviate.
Yes.
I did take these things, which I was going to skip, but I'd rather not. She read these beautiful quotes, so I thought if you don't have them right, maybe you can. I have them typed up now. So this is from the Udana. It's the collection of indicative verses. I never hear it that way. It's the Udana Vagra. I just know it as the Udana. It's from the Pali Canon. These beautiful short utterances. I know it as utterances of the Buddha. I think that's how I know that. Anyway, here's the verses she read. The first was, people relying on someone inferior wither. Those relying on one of their peers stay the same. Those relying on leaders attain sanctity. Therefore, rely on those ahead of you. And then the next one was, endowed with discipline, complete peace, and even more superior wisdom. If you rely on any such mentors, you'll even end up ahead of them. And then the last one, which we've probably heard many times, the sages do not wash away evil with water. They do not remove the suffering of beings by hand, like pulling out a thorn out of your foot. They do not graft or transfer their realizations onto others. They liberate by teaching the truth of nature, of reality's nature. So that's really what we're trying to do here. Okay, so then now we're on to the characteristic of the disciples. And I didn't, this is really our part now, and very important, although I'm going to go over it. I've really abbreviated it. But basically, we need to make ourselves into a proper student, and we do this over time. We don't do this overnight. It takes time, but we make ourselves into this. So the main three things, like as they say in the 400 stanzas by Aryadeva, is impartial, intelligent, and full of endeavor. Without these, there's no change in the listener. So these are the three main things that we need: impartial, intelligence, and full of endeavor. So in our text here, it says it this way: rejecting bias and being endowed with intense aspiration. So to be impartial and intelligent, that helps us to take in new ideas and contemplate them. We're always swimming upstream in the Dharma. We're always going to be kind of getting rid of a lot of the ways we think and see things. I mean, that's what we need to do. And so we have to keep our minds, we have to be able to be open so that we can hear new things and consider them. And then being intelligent so we know kind of what to adopt, what to, be able to distinguish what to practice and what to abandon. That's the second point here. Having the intelligence to distinguish a spiritual path from one that is not. And so we do that by studying, but we have to have the intelligence to make, these distinctions. And so Venerable says, then listen and write things down, relate it to your life so that you will understand the advice that's given. It all comes back to, relate it to your life, and then it will all fall into place. And then the third is paying close attention to the teachings when listening, enabling. Ensure you have these qualities, for they are the characteristics of a disciple. So we pay attention, we stay enthusiastic during the teachings and in our practice too. So once you've selected a qualified teacher and become a qualified disciple, then you learn how to rely on them in thought. And this is how to rely on the teacher in thought is what it's talking about here. So before you've selected the teacher is the time to really have more of the critical mind, looking, discerning. Once you've selected someone as your teacher, you have to learn to put that mind aside. It's not like you would throw out ethics or anything like that. That's not what it's talking about here. It's just that we have really judgmental minds and we pick faults very easily. And so usually about things that have nothing to do with ethics, we'll just get, thinking poorly of our teachers. It's, we do that with everyone, so we will do it with them too. It's just natural. So what it says here is, with great faith, focus on the Master's good qualities. Do not consider their faults even for an instant, for it will hinder your achievement of spiritual realizations. If through carelessness you regard their faults, confess it immediately. So it's, you don't want to take that in the wrong way. You want to check out the qualities of the teacher before you accept them, and then realize that once you've selected them, it's in your best interest not to fall into this kind of judgmental mind. And so what you do is you actually contemplate their good qualities. And that's how you can do, when you find yourself, they're a Democrat and I'm a Republican, or whatever it is, whatever it is. Or when they point out things and you can't hear them, and so you get, like, why are they saying that? So you have to realize that you would even criticize the Buddha. Yeah. So, it's usually we find faults because they're just doing things differently than how we would. We're not talking about ethical things. It's more just different priorities and things like that. And she says, if we do this, we'll run ourselves to a hole thinking the teacher is a total idiot. We're capable of that. We'll quit attending the teachings, and then we won't practice, and we will get nowhere. How are you going to gain realizations that way? It's to our benefit if we want to gain realizations to do this process as the Lamrim teaches. Don't run quickly into accepting someone as a teacher. Take your time. His Holiness says it can take you 10 years to make that decision about an individual. And it is a very unique relationship. So don't go into it in a cavalier or flighty way, because this is the person who they're going to guide you in your spiritual development, and you're going to become like them. That's what Geshe Khyentse Drangpa Tekchok said. Venerable Children said it too. We want someone who knows the path well and can guide us on the right path so we get somewhere. And this has an influence also on our future lives. And so when you think about it, this is more important than any relationship that we have in this life. Your parents gave you this life. That's completely precious. But our relationship with a spouse or siblings or children or whatever, it's all this life. This relationship is one that determines what happens in our future lives. So once you take on this Buddhist worldview of lifetime after lifetime after lifetime of being controlled by your afflictions and, karma, it's like, yeah, let's get out of this now. And your parents are not going to be able to guide you in that. Your college professors are not going to be able to guide you in that. So then how do we form a relationship with a teacher? This is Venerable Children now. One way that happens is we take any kind of precepts from them. That's one, you're forming a relationship there. Or you just, you've been around them long enough and you decide they're your teacher. It doesn't have to be anything formal. And she says in this thing about, keep a positive state of mind towards them. We still keep our common sense. You don't whitewash anything. You don't want to lose your ability to think. Sometimes we hear stories about things, and it's just amazing to me what people do sometimes. It feels like they've just let go of all logic because they're like devoting themselves to a teacher, and that's definitely not how we're taught here. The teacher, the Buddha points the way. The Buddha can't enlighten you, right? Your teacher can't enlighten you. You have to generate the realizations yourself, so you have to be able to think. You can't just give away that. So, okay. So having recalled their kindness, develop veneration, and I don't think Venerable would use that word. She uses more respect or gratitude. And so that's again where we think they're teaching me just what the Buddha would teach if he were here. So that kind of thinking is important because we really easily take things for granted in our lives. We take everything for granted, our body, our health. Only when something's gone do we are you aware now that you don't have a toothache? No. We take it for granted that our teeth are okay. But, they might not be okay tomorrow. That's just how we do everything. So we want to have this kind of gratitude and respect. It keeps our heart very warm. That helps us. We are able to stay in touch with their kindness and teaching us and directing us. And also a lot of us, as monastics, they're providing for us also. So then she read these beautiful verses. The 10 Dharma Sutra verses. They are spiritual mentors. Look for me who has roamed in cyclic existence for a long time. They awaken me from a long time of obscuration and torpor due to ignorance. They pull me out as I sink in the ocean of existence. They show good paths to me who has entered bad ones. They free me who has been bound in the prison of existence. They are a doctor to me who has been tormented by illness. I should generate the notion of them as rain clouds pacifying me who has been ablaze with the fire of attachment and the like. And then this is from the Ray of Stalks Sutra, which is part of the Avatamsaka Sutra when we do the King of Prayers, right? These are my spiritual friends, expounders of the Dharma, exclusively teaching the qualities of all Dharmas, thoroughly teaching the conduct of bodhisattvas. With these thoughts in mind, I have come here. Let's see. As they give birth to all that, they are like my mother. They give me the milk of virtues, so they are like nurses. They cleanse me completely by means of enlightenment's branches. These spiritual friends completely exorcise harm. They are like doctors releasing from death and old age, showering a rain of nectar. They are like the Lord Indra. Like the full moon, they flourish with virtuous qualities. They show the direction of peace, just like bright sunlight. Regarding friends and foes, they are like mountains. They have minds as undisturbed as the tranquil sea. They give perfect support, some say like boatmen. With this in mind, I've come here. Bodhisattvas bring forth my understanding. Bodhisattvas cause enlightenment. These beings, these friends of mine, are praised by the Buddha. With such virtuous thoughts, I have come here. As they save the world, they are like heroes. They have become the captains, protectors, and refuge. They are the eye bestowing happiness on me. With thoughts like these, honor your spiritual mentors. So that's very poetic and beautiful. And really, she gave a lot of commentary on those. But it's basically, if you understand the miseries of cyclic existence, they're going to free us from all of that. Okay, we're getting there. So then how to rely on them indeed. Well, I usually have so many pages I can do and so much time, and I have more pages than I usually want. But I have my own little mission in mind here. So how to rely on them indeed. And this I'm just going to go through quickly. We're not trying to be a people pleaser. It's not what pleasing mean when they use that word here. They say, please them by offering your life, children, spouse, wealth, retinue, all this stuff. Basically, we try to offer things materially. We're not really at a place where we're supposed to give up our life, but we just, at our level, want to think that the Dharma is the most important thing in our life, and so we dedicate ourselves. And so when they say offering your children or spouse, this is really asking the practitioner to look at who are you attached to, and so try to give up attachment and not be so have a mind that's so emotionally volatile. So that's what it's kind of going for there. Where it says offer your wealth, you try to offer things that they can use. It helps them to do what they're doing in the world to benefit sentient beings. The second thing is offer service, so we attend to the teacher's needs. All the many things we do here, like setting up teachings, arranging their travel, helping with their virtuous project. Here in our text it says, never go against their words. And that really means we're trying to follow their instructions. A lot of the times we can't, but we endeavor to. I mean, we're growing into it, so we don't always have even the ability to follow all the instructions. But we should have at least have the aspiration and be working ourselves into that. Yeah. We aspire to do the practices that we aren't ready for and hold them in high regard. And then one other thing she said about not going against their word, she's pointed out this thing that it's not so wise to go in and ask for advice and then not follow it. It's like it would be better maybe not to go in if you don't plan on following it. And I also think that if you ask different teachers the same question, you're setting yourself up for a lot of confusion. And she seemed to agree with that point. So if they tell you to do something that you don't want to do, first work with your mind, and then maybe tell them that this isn't something that you can do right now and explain it. but it's not so sensible to just reject things wholehandedly. You first should kind of sit with things that they instruct you to do, work it out. That's where it really helps to learn how to close the mouth, work it out, see what you can do, and then come back respectfully. And then the third is offer your practice. And that's the most important. This is considered the best offering. So your virtue and your good karma. And then the benefits of relying on a spiritual mentor is that we'll be pleasing to the Buddhas, we'll be close to the teachers, we'll not fall into lower rebirths because we're following the teachings. We will be less buffeted around by our karma and afflictions, while our good qualities will be enhanced, our temporary and ultimate goals will be achieved. And these will surpass making offerings to the Buddhas, saying here that it's incredible merit to make offerings to the Buddhas, but these benefits are even better. And if we don't rely on them, then, here our text is quite graphic. At your death, you'll roast in the unrelenting torment. Basically, it's not going to lead to a happy rebirth or a happy situation, probably even in this life. Our good qualities won't arise, and even the good qualities we have can easily decline. And why would that happen? Is because if you're not relying on the spiritual mentor properly, you probably will stop practicing, or you might not be practicing correctly. So big thing is don't blow up at your teacher. That's the bottom line. Just learn how to work with your mind first, and then see, and that's why we have our Dharma friends to help us and support each other as we grow. And then you could look, if you're interested in the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas, verse number 5 and 6, talk about this as well. Okay, so we got all the way up to the 6 preliminary practices, which I am not going to go through, but I did go over. So I just want to say about this part that it's important to understand these 6 preliminary practices, because here what they're doing in the Lamrim is they're telling you how to structure your meditation session. These are very beneficial. And so these are the things like cleaning and setting up an altar, arranging the offerings, sitting and setting your motivation, visualizing the merit field, doing the 7-limb prayer. And then she went into all of this, making the mandala offering and the request. That's the 6th one. She went into the 4 opponent powers in this. She went into the 7-limb prayer. She really taught this quite well. And if anyone doesn't know those practices and wants my notes, send an email and I'll send them to you, because I personally think we need to. It's so easy to do this at the beginning of your practice, and it's really beneficial for your practice to know how to structure a session, so you just don't go sit in a meditation hall or do a retreat and not know what to do. Because basically this is telling you how to structure your session, and then the rest of the Lamrim is telling you what to do, what to meditate on. And so it's not a hard teaching to understand. It's a good one to memorize. It's not hard to memorize. Sometimes it's confusing the way it's taught. I've read it in different places where it's hard to get the numbers right, because it has been taught differently. Because I have like a number of versions of it, but I can send you the way Venerable teaches it. It's not like there's any difference in them. It's just where they put the numbers sometimes is a little different. She really emphasized in this particular teaching the main aspects of it, and I think it makes a lot of sense how she laid this out in terms of how she numbered it and everything. So we'll end there. What was left, just to know that we've gone through so far, is the next things that came up were, it explained how to conclude a session. She went over the 3 levels of practice and how all the teachings are involved in that. Then it started to go into a precious human life, And then the teaching started to go into death and impermanence. And so we'll just close with this. Where we're at in the teachings, we're in the first scope here, the initial level practitioner. And the initial level practitioner has this aspiration to die peacefully and have a good rebirth. So they have to do meditations in order to develop that aspiration, in order to develop that motivation. So that's where we're at. In order to develop that motivation, you think about precious human life, how rare it is and everything, and then, wow, it can be gone tomorrow, and your situation could be awful, misery. So that helps you to develop the motivation. And then once you have that motivation, then in this first scope, then they have the teachings on refuge and karma, because that's what you have to practice in order to actualize that motivation. So the teachings are very laid out. This chart is so helpful. It has the whole Lamrim on one page. What motivation you're trying to develop, what meditations to do to get that motivation, what meditations to do to achieve that. So you can, it's every time I teach now at Airway Heights, I try to put our teaching in this context so you get an idea of what we're doing. So that's also something, if you don't have it, I'll scan it and send it to you. And if you don't have it here, I'll photocopy it. It's really one page that's worth having.
Where did you get that?
Venerable Children gave it to us years ago, and it's in, it's I don't know, I think she said it's in maybe Taming the Mind, I can't remember. I think it's in one of her books too. Anyway, so I'm happy to give it to anyone here or abroad. Just write office.sravasti@gmail.com. Okay, so we'll take all the good energy from having had the opportunity to receive these teachings from Venerable Children and think about them. Maybe take out some of your notes this week and, use the parts that are resonating or that you want to learn about and use it in your life. So let's take all of this that we're doing and dedicate it to anyone who's suffering, to our eventual Buddhahood, to help all beings who are suffering.